'Twas a regular day in the English colonies when they decided to start another friendly neighborhood war called the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War. They fought and won in the end, but lost a lot of money. So the soldiers arrived back in glorious Great Britain, and instead of being met with cheers and applause, "Oh, you're alive, oh, you won the war," they were met with a note from the king to go straight back to the colonies saying,
"You need to go collect your taxes and enforce all my new rules."
And no matter how much they didn't like it, they followed the orders, and they went back. Here, let me explain to you what they were going over to do. So after the war, obviously money was short, so the king sent his soldiers to collect taxes and enforce new rules. The things they were sent to enforce were the Sugar Act, which taxed all sugar colonists bought, and Stamp Act, which taxed all printed materials. The thing was, the money didn't go to the colonial legislators, but instead directly to the king. After the 2-week journey, or 12 days to be exact, soldiers arrived at the colonies to enforce the new acts and were met with some unhappy colonists. In response, the colonists started to boycott the British goods and also attempted to smuggle certain things around. But the thing is, originally when they would get caught, they would get sent to the colonial court, but after the act, they started to get sent to the British court. The colonists did not like the changing courts, as they felt that their own courts would understand them as people better. But nothing happened, and that's the way that it was. Sadly, a lot of colonists were not happy with this change. Propaganda was widely spread across the colonies, showing a disliking towards these acts. The British were fed up with the boycotting, decided to end the Stamp Act, but also enacted the Declaratory Act. The Declaratory Act stated that the English Parliament had full control over the colonies, and colonists were not happy at all since they couldn't elect people to Parliament, but they had to follow their rules. They felt that they should not be asked to follow laws if they had no way to influence them. They thought it was a major violation of rights, so they just kept spreading propaganda. Later on in the same month, Parliament decided to start requiring colonists to quarter or to provide or pay for housing all the British troops and give them food under the Quartering Act. The king sent more soldiers to the colonies to advise the colonists to make sure they weren't smuggling goods or causing another not-so-friendly tea party. Colonists found this as another violation of rights, simply the right to privacy and property. Newsflash, the king didn't care. Colonial response to all this was a petition saying that these right-violating rules should be stopped and only the colonies can tax colonists. They're practically saying, no taxation without representation. Big part of what led to the Declaration of Independence. It didn't work. Later on, Parliament decided to pass the Township Act, which taxed lots of things important to the colonies, including previously taxed items. Not only did the colonists boycott the goods, but so did businesses in Philadelphia, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and North Carolina. Another response besides boycotting is tar and feathering tax collectors, which was a violent way for the colonists to say back off. With more violence leads to more soldiers being present in the colonies, which is not good for both sides. A crowd of colonists decided it was the right idea to harass British soldiers. I personally can't blame them for what the soldiers were doing to them, but it led to the soldiers firing into a crowd, injuring 16 and killing 5 in the Boston Massacre. Troops were withdrawn out of Boston and all tax rolls were lifted except those on tea. Colonial propaganda spread depicting the massacre, which was used to convince loyalists to be against the Brits and to create more anger and hatred towards the English. Later on, Parliament decided to make the already existing tax policies on tea slightly different. They decided to make only one brand of tea, the British East India Company, the only company allowed to import tea to the colonies, making tea even more expensive and few ways to get around it. This was met with some violent acts, most notably the Boston Tea Party, where a group of patriots called the Sons of Liberty boarded a tea shipment boat and dumped crates of tea in Boston Harbor dressed as Native American. England decided that they needed to put their foot down and take more control over the colonies and pass the Intolerable Acts. The Intolerable Acts are also known as the Coercive Acts, were a list of laws that were made in response to the Tea Party. The Intolerable Acts did or removed the following. The port in Boston was closed until the damage from the Tea Party was paid back, and no more troops were sent for surveillance under military rule, no more due process because royals had to have their court rulings in England due to it being illegal in the colonies. The colonial government in Massachusetts was ending self-government, and they now allowed the royal governor to appoint colonial legislator. All colonists were ordered to quarter soldiers, ending their property rights. The Parliament claimed the land to Canada for Massachusetts, Virginia, and Connecticut. In response to these acts, the First Continental Congress was born. Their first meet was held in Philadelphia with representatives from each colony except for Georgia. They declared these acts should not be followed, going against British rule. They knew the soldiers wouldn't like this, so they started forming and training their own, forming the first militias of America. They also started to boycott imported goods and stop exporting goods. Here's where I'm going to start getting into detail. On April 18, 1775, a patriot named Paul Revere rode from Boston to warn patriots the British were coming to take the guns. A day later, a shot was heard coming from the British, also known as the shot heard around the world, which is known to be the catalyst of the Revolutionary War. Shots were being trained in the historical Battle of Lexington and Concord. On June 17, 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill commenced between the Patriots and the British, ending in an English victory. After the loss, the Second Continental Congress sent the Olive Branch petition to the king, asking for negotiation. So the fighting doesn't have to persist. Patriots were simply ignored by the king. Instead, he proclaimed that the Patriots were rebelling and sent more soldiers to end this so-called rebellion. Let's rewind time for a little bit and meet a man named Thomas Paine, who landed in the colonies in 1774 looking for a new life and got swept up in these events leading to the Revolution. Speaking of, let's get back to the Revolution now. At the beginning of 1776, he released a pamphlet titled Common Sense, with a basic and understandable message that said people should rule. He was dramatic and a good versus evil point of view, and his pamphlet to corral more colonists into becoming patriots. Is a great example of colonial propaganda, and it worked. Inspired by Paine, Richard Henry Lee presented a formal plan calling for the colonies to declare their independence from England, and on June 11, Congress created a committee to write the Declaration of Independence, and Thomas Jefferson was hired to complete the first draft, and complete the first draft he did in one day. On June 28th, Jefferson had his draft presented to Congress, and lo and behold, on July 4th, 1776, that faithful day, the Declaration of Independence was approved and later on signed by a majority of the 55 Congress members.
Hey guys, it's me, annoying TikTok AI voice girl aka Jessie, here to tell you about the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence included many things that the creators and colonists thought were fair and fundamental, pretty much all the things the king didn't care about. This included natural rights, an idea mainly credited to John Locke. Inalienable or natural rights are rights given at birth that cannot be taken away or obstructed by the government or its people. The fundamental rights John Locke listed were life, liberty, and property, later revised by Thomas Jefferson to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is what you can see in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence also includes things about the role of government, which is to ensure that rights are protected for the citizens and members of the government. If the government is protecting the citizens, we should return the favor by sacrificing some of our liberties for the best interest of the people and government occasionally, which is part of something called a social contract, which is just an agreement by the people and their higher-ups that say we will protect you as long as you give up some of your liberties and rights and stuff or not. A bunch of bad things had happened to the colonists leading up to the Declaration of Independence, things like the Intolerable Acts, which were just a huge smack in the face, giving them a 3-for-1 deal on right losses featuring loss of due process, self-government, and property rights. Or to sum it all up, there were 3 main grievances: loss of individual rights, unfair taxation, and misrepresentation. All of these topics and more grievances were made sure to be fixed within the Declaration of Independence, with some integrated into natural rights. All these grievances were targeted directly at the king and his tyrannical government. All these grievances lead to direct colonial responses like boycotting and propaganda and other previously mentioned violent acts. To fix all these grievances, we have rules set in place so these bad things don't have to happen again and tyranny is prevented. They also connect to the idea of consent of the governed, which means you can't do something massively affecting the people without letting them allow you to, or at least the majority. And that's pretty much it for the Declaration of Independence and its birth story. The history of America sure is interesting.